So the reporting right now seems to have finally cleared up about how this aid freeze happened. It indicates that the aid freeze that we saw was actually the result of four separate attempts at aid freezes. The aid freeze that happened before, that was seemingly in some way disciplinary towards the Ukrainians as for not playing ball in negotiations. Mind you, the Russians have never had any physical action taken against them when they didn't engage in negotiations or when they blew off every negotiation or violated the ceasefires that they did agree with, like the civilian one to the Trump administration, according to the Trump administration. So, there was that aid freeze. Then there was two attempted aid freezes that were overturned, and then the most recent aid freeze, which was not done by Donald Trump leading the way. It was at a really inopportune time, after all. But it seemed to be clear that it was Pete Hegseth and those under him, like Elbridge Colby, who led the way on the aid freeze to Kiev. Now, the reason why this is startling is multifaceted. The first reason why this is startling is just the base reason of this is a very, very important decision to freeze aid to one of America's most embattled, if not the most embattled, which I would argue, ally in the world who most needs this aid. There is no American ally that needs Patriot systems right now more than Ukraine, or Patriot missiles, or GLMRS rockets, or the 155 millimeter howitzer shells. All of the things that were frozen were things that Ukraine needs desperately right now. And so for Pete Hegseth to make this decision independently without the say of the President of the United States, that is quite startling. It is especially startling considering that there was not unanimity when it comes to his assessment that we needed to freeze this pending a review of our stockpiles and supply because we have shortages. This is originally what was put out was, it's the shortages. And then it was, pending a review where we're talking about shortages before it was eventually reversed. Mind you, though, many of the systems, like the GLMRS rockets, we do not have shortages of. We do not have a critical shortage of. And the Joint Staff did come out with a statement and said that none of the aid that we were sending over, our continuance of sending that aid, the 30 Patriot missiles that were already on trucks ready to head over to Poland, the artillery shells, the rockets, none of this would make America face a critical weapon shortage crisis. Mind you, this is the same time when CENTCOM is firing off munitions like it's the 4th of July. But, of course, the aid going towards the largest interstate war in the world, where we have direct interests in, and Europe's security future is being determined in, this is where it's being frozen without the say of the President of the United States. Okay, so it's concerning that this would happen, period. It's especially concerning that this would happen during this moment diplomatically. Trump is supposed to, if we believe the public persona and what he says to the public, in not a certain type of malice that is other times assumed. If we assume that he genuinely wants to end the war as fast as possible, and that his recent statements of the Russians, just talking a bunch of nonsense and dragging him along, and the recent more positive statements about Zelensky, if this is all to be believed, for this aid freeze to happen at this moment is the worst. I couldn't think of a worst possible moment. Right when he gets inaugurated would have been a better moment. 3 months ago would have been a better moment. Any other moment would have been better. Not because it ever would have been better, but at this moment, the signal is being sent as the Trump administration is trying to make the Russians think that they're serious. When they're trying to send the signal, hey, if you continue with this war, you're going to get bad sanctions. If you continue with this war, it's just going to lead for more casualties for you. If you continue this war, you're just going to be slamming your head against a brick wall. It's supposed to be the signal that it would be better for everyone if you just took the deal that we offered. And so if you're trying to make them legitimately think that this time, this red line, this deadline, this instance of deployment, it will finally be the one where a trigger gets pulled after they've been hesitant. I mean, they've had a little, a little bit of a trigger hesitation, trigger anxiety. That if you're really going to make them believe it, preluding that with aid freezes, saying things like, we just don't have enough stuff to help the Ukrainians, when the Joint Staff is saying that isn't true. What do you mean? That does not send the signal that you have a priority in actually bringing the war to a conclusion through pressure, or in seeing the Russians not continue to do these types of invasions into Europe. It doesn't send the signal. It actually sends the signal that you're not that interested. It's not worth your time. Yet we're supposed to believe that this lack of credibility that Trump has built is supposed to be the exact threat that stopped the Russians from invading back in 2022 if he was to threaten to bomb them. It doesn't layer well. Okay, the credibility in this moment being undermined is absolutely terrible. And then there is the third reason why this decision being made without Trump is actually gigantic news. And it should be huge news in Trump world. It should be the biggest news in Trump world. Donald Trump's entire pitch to his base this time when it comes to his cabinet and making sure that the administration, because when you elect a president, you just don't elect a president, you elect an administration around him, that the administration around him would serve their interests. It would serve his objectives when it comes to border security. It would serve his objectives when it comes to peace through strength. It would serve his objectives when it comes to the economy. It would serve his objectives when it comes to cultural issues. That he would not be undermined, that he would not be played around with, that those around him would respect him. They would be competent. They'd be good people who have his interests at heart. And first and foremost, listen to the President of the United States and do not take decisions or do not go off on a limb without the president's say so, because that could leave the president up for manipulation. That could leave his administration up for manipulation, could leave the president uninformed, and could have the administration taking decisions that are against the president's interests, or against what the president wants, against his objectives, or is taken without the president's knowledge when it's crucial information, i.e. something that has to do with the largest war on the planet currently being fought, with one of the participants being an atomic power and the other one being our ally. So this seems to undermine the idea that Trump is an independent president. This seems to undermine the idea that Trump has a grasp on everything that's going on around him, or even has his hands on the reins when it comes to what his administration is doing. It makes you think about all those reports from the first administration, whether it has to be in the books that were published or the interviews that were done, saying that often Trump is dragged around by whoever the last person he talks to is. Whoever is the last person in the room is often the person who gets to dictate policy, because that's the last thing that Donald Trump heard. This was a rumor and testimony from multiple people in his administration that kept getting repeated by those who worked in the belly of the beast, so to speak. And so to once again see defense secretaries or whoever in the administration thinking that they can make these types of decisions without the president's knowledge, without the president's input, at such a crucial point in the war where this could genuinely, if there was any chance of negotiation succeeding, which at this point, I think there isn't, but if there was any chance of it succeeding in the near term that somehow I missed, well, this just undermines that on its face. It makes it seem like the administration's not serious. The administration, even if it wanted to, couldn't apply pressure, and that we don't really have that much of an interest. Because while we're willing to fire volley after volley at the Houthis to a point that we're expanding our supply at a faster rate than we're replenishing it, to the point that Asian Pacific commanders are like, I don't know, Chief, it's not really working on the Houthis. Maybe we should save a few of those missiles. If we can take that approach in the Middle East, and we take this approach in Europe, the different signals that are being sent is not even, hey, this is the pivot to Asia. It's, hey, this is not necessarily a priority for us. Because if it was the pivot to Asia, these resources wouldn't be being expended in the Middle East like they are. They'd be being sent over to Asia. But instead, here we are. And so the signals being sent are what they are, and the Russians are going to interpret them as they are. Now, Trump has responded to this scandal by not saying I had no clue about anything whatsoever, but by very clearly saying, I don't know, and indicating that, yeah, he really had no idea when this decision was made. He doesn't know how to answer for it. So, of course, he pivots the blame as if he was, somebody who didn't know. And now let's say that there's two scenarios here. The first scenario is that he doesn't know. Well, it's bad that the president of the United States is having these types of decisions made without his knowledge actively, even though it undermines what he's trying to achieve. So that's bad. But the other alternative, which is that he did know, means that he's making decisions. He's making decisions to cut aid and then reversing those decisions within a week. So he's indecisive, and once again reverberating the idea that you can just wait him out, especially since the aid that is being sent is less than the aid that was being sent before when it comes to the Patriot interceptors. Let's listen to what the president had to say, though, to see if he sent that message of strength, peace through strength.
Mr. President, you have sent more weapons to Ukraine, as you said last night. Last week, the Pentagon paused some shipments of weapons to Ukraine. Did you approve of that pause?
We wanted to put defensive weapons because Putin is not, he's not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. What did you tell me?
I think that's a question for the
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's his administration. He's the president of the United States. His administration ordered the pause on weapons, and he's asking the journalist who did it. The journalists might have been finding out faster about who made these decisions than the president of the United States. And if he does know, then this is just a clear diversion of the fact that, let's not talk about the fact that I didn't make that decision. And what is to tell the Russians that some other low-level bureaucrat won't make a decisive decision when it comes to rocket supplies or artillery supplies or whatever supplies are going to be coming forward in the future again? Here is Trump being asked directly this in the last 24 or 48 hours about whether or not he was the person who ordered this. Yesterday, you said you were not sure who ordered the munitions ordered to Ukraine. Who ordered the munitions ordered to Ukraine? Have you figured it out? I haven't thought about it.
Yeah, please.
Sir, yesterday you said that you were not sure who ordered the munitions halted to Ukraine. Have you since been able to figure that out?
Well, I haven't thought about it because we're looking at Ukraine right now and munitions, but I have not gone into it.
What does it say that such a big decision could be made inside your government without you knowing?
I would know. If a decision was made, I will know. I'll be the first to know. In fact, most likely I'd give the order, but I haven't done that yet. Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Sir, yes.
So he doesn't know. This was a decision made completely outside of his purview. This is supposed to be Mr. Art of the Deal. This is supposed to be the guy who had the Konami code, the special move set that was going to get us into a peace deal when there was nothing on the horizon, and when everybody who's been here and knows how the war is going and has listened to the Russians talk about the war would have told you that the chances of getting a settlement now without a massive change in leverage by bringing new tools to the table was extremely slim. And so Trump then brought no new tools to the table, played pussyfoot under the table for about 170 days once in office, gained no progress before he was in office, even though at one point he talked about a peace deal even before he was inaugurated. And now decisions are being made about aid shipments to Ukraine being frozen or unfrozen completely without his knowledge. And this was the man who was somehow supposed to bring a rapid, fast end to the war. And now that he doesn't know how to bring a rapid, fast end to the war, he certainly doesn't know how to deal with the continuation of the war and having to protect American national security, having to protect our allies in Europe, having to hold up our commitments that we made to the Ukrainians, or any semblance of moral stature that we could claim to have if we truly abandon the Ukrainians, as the signal has been sent many times that we may be willing to do.
Burns is in.
If you're in this admin, you're allowed to do whatever in the dear leader's name. This is a kabuki
Burns
government.
is an immoral, morally
Not good.
corrupt, bankrupt
No
man.
bueno. No bueno. And mind you, Who is it that the president is sticking out his neck for? Who exactly is the man
Burns is
that
an immoral,
morally corrupt, bankrupt man? I should have waited till the last one came by. Let me try that again. And who exactly is President Trump sticking his neck out for? It's the same guy who sent classified information to his wife with no clearance, who went through this whole Signal scandal, along with the no longer present Mike Waltz, who left his congressional seat to become national security advisor, who is the same guy that is now making decisions without the president's know-how when it comes to the Department of Defense. The same man that reports indicate is, quite frankly, way out of his depth and is spending much more time trying to hunt leakers than renovate the DOD. This is the man right here that President Trump is sticking his neck out for. A man who's more focused, generally speaking, from everything that I've seen, with the media than actually making the American military the lethal machine that he talks so much about to the media. But who would have thought Fox News star ended up being a much better media mogul, which Trump wanted out of his cabinet picks, than actual administrator?
You know what?
This is what we get instead of an independent decision-making president who wants to keep consistency in our position with the Russians to make them treat us with some amount of respectability. That, okay, if we don't listen to the Americans, we could have consequences. Not, if we don't listen to the Americans, eventually some bureaucrat will just decide Ukraine is too woke for aid. And it's all for this guy right here in these types of media displays. This media display right here is worth the leaks, worth the undercutting of the president, worth the mismanagement, worth the paranoia.
We know why we were put here. We were brought here to rebuild the military, match capabilities to the threats of today. So while our adversaries have produced millions of cheap drones, before us, we were mired in bureaucratic red tape. Not anymore. In June, President Trump issued an executive order unleashing American drone dominance to bolster our drone industry and arm our warfighters, because that's what we're all about. So today, I'm rescinding restrictive policies that stifle production, and this will unleash American manufacturing and the ingenuity of our warfighters by doing three key things. First, we're going to bolster the U.S. drone manufacturing base by producing thousands of American-made products, prioritizing Buy American. We'll arm combat units with a variety of low-cost, American-crafted drones.
The Buy American thing was a bipartisan thing. Like, Joe Biden was of the same, but this is not nothing new.
Leveraging our world-leading engineers and AI experts. And third, we're going to train as we expect to fight. Senior officers, well, I'll grab this because it's the memo. Senior officers must overcome bureaucratic, risk-averse.
He feels so cool. Metallica in the background. I get to pull the piece of paper off of the drone.
In budgeting, weaponeering, and training. So here's the memo we're signing today, delivered via drones. Here on the front lawn of the Pentagon, with some of our great warfighters flying them. This is the future. We're in the fight. We're in the fight to win it. I'm never going to back down.
What was that? Was that just a delay to wait for the drone to come in place? And then the drone flies off into the distance. This is really it. This is all we get out of Pete Hegseth being DOD head. He has no special skills. And that's a damnable thing to say about a man. But like, unless Hegseth, right? Instead of a DI hire, we got a DUI hire. Unless it's like, he's doing something media related or he's crushing some of the bud, I don't really see what he brings to the position. He was a soldier. Okay. A lot of people are soldiers. A lot of those same soldiers should not be DOD head. Managing the largest and most expensive like destruction machine on the planet is a little bit different than shooting a rifle. And he managed a NGO of about 100 people. That is the depth, the complete depth. There's a ton of 4-star generals that could have the position. There's a ton of people who have had experience managing tons of people in the armed forces. There's people who have managed many more people at NGOs providing veteran services or having to do with the defense sector in some way. Maybe those working in defense companies or those working in drone innovation. There's a million other people. Instead, we got the Fox News host that undermines the president and sends classified information to his wife. That's what we got instead. Mind you, when he's making decisions without the president say so, what type of logic is Pete Hegseth using when deciding, hey, even though we have the largest air attacks on Ukraine of the entire war, let me freeze these air interceptors literally at the border as they're breaking records, irrespective of the signal that it's going to send to Russia? What type of logic went into that decision-making that this man made without the president's knowledge? Well, let's listen to some of it. This is from 2023. So this is just 2 years ago. And this is after Pete Hegseth was initially very supportive of continuing support to Ukraine. Or at least supporting Ukraine back in 2022.
And Ukraine, you can't, that Schumer statement you mentioned about him sort of talking about Putin it's basically a fight Donald Trump by fighting Putin through Zelensky war in Ukraine. Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's like it's their ability.
Dude, that's so true. That is so true.
They finally found a war they just absolutely love. And it was all over the defense of Europe, as if he couldn't even take Kiev. Now he's going to take Europe. And we need to throw the kitchen sink at it, even though he's got a bunch of nukes and could light the world on fire if he wanted to.
So this is the logic that's being used here. Like it's basically supporting Ukraine's lib-coded. That's essentially what he said. Supporting Ukraine's lib-coded. And Russia isn't a threat to Europe because they weren't able to take Kiev. Basically, the defensive competence that the Ukrainians showed means that the Russians are so incompetent that they're no threat to Europe. Something somebody equally could have said about Russian leadership after the invasion of Finland. They weren't able to take Helsinki. You think they're a threat to Warsaw? You think they're going to, what Iron Curtain? That's ridiculous. The idea that their initial failure to take this war off the ground successfully at the start and their lack of success in pursuing it through means that they're not really that significant of a threat, and you don't want to be lib-coded anyway. This is the type of decision making. This is the type of thinking. This is the type of really rambling that is being projected out of the mouth of the defense secretary 2 years before he got inaugurated. Not a lot of time to learn. Not a lot of time to learn. Mind you, this is also happening at the same time that, according to the Russians, they're making progress. They're going forward. They don't talk much about the losses. But according to Marco Rubio, the losses right now are quite immense. Secretary Marco Rubio gave some remarks to a press scrum after a convention in Kuala Lumpur, where he met with the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. According to the only thing of note from that meeting is that Marco Rubio, even though it's the same old beats of nothing new, nothing that'll lead to progress, he said that, nothing new that could be talked about publicly. He said there was something new, that they offered something new, and that he's going to bring it back to Washington. We have no clue what that new thing is. We have no clue if it's progress or anything. Probably isn't. More likely than not, it's another way to keep the United States engaged and to stop a sanction package from going through and to stop massive new weapon sales deals being made to the Ukrainians, to continue to try to deny pressure from the West. But another thing that was interesting from this press scrum is Marco Rubio talked about exactly how much damage the Russians are receiving, according to him, who is, while not a perfectly reliable source, certainly going to be more reliable than a number coming out of the president's mouth. Listen to this. And again, I mean, it's every time you see this in the headlines and people die, it reminds you of why the president wants this war to end. As he has said from the beginning, his number one interest here is stop people from dying and destruction that's going on every single day. They're going to have a conference, maybe it starts today, if I'm not mistaken, about reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine. Every time one of these strikes is launched, the price of reconstruction goes up, right? There's also the destruction of the country's capabilities, the country's economic capabilities. That has to be added to this. But obviously, the loss of life is something of grave interest, of great interest to the president. And I quote, "It's important to note that since January of this year, as an example, just give to you, on the Russian side, they've lost 100,000 soldiers. Since January of this year, they've lost 100 soldiers dead, not injured, 300. 300 meaning. And on the Ukrainian side, the numbers are less, but still significant." Now, I want to throw a few things out at you. This isn't 100,000 soldiers, 300 since the start of the war. This is 100,000 soldiers since January of this year, dead. Now, mind you, the typical ratio of dead to wounded is about 1 to 3, meaning that if what Marco Rubio is saying here is true, for 100,000 soldiers that are 200, not 300 isn't dead, 300 is wounded, that are 200, there should be 300,000 soldiers that are wounded. Meaning that the casualty figure that you could derive from this should have a general range of 300,000 to 400,000 within the last 6 months. That is an incredibly high casualty rate and would suggest something about like 2K casualties a day. I don't know if it's true. Sometimes the casualty rate doesn't, of course, mathematically line up that way, but typically speaking, that's how it goes. If you have those many people who are deceased, then you should have a significant larger size that are wounded. Because it's easier to wound a soldier than it is to take out a soldier. So if this is true, if this rate of loss for the Russian army is anywhere near the truth, then we're talking about something like 570 KIA a day. 570 KIA a day. If you include wounded and missing, that's about 2K casualties a day, leading to 300 to 400,000 casualties since January. That is not endlessly sustainable. That is not something a country can put up with forever. That is something that exceeds the amount of casualties we took in Vietnam within a third of that time. You go from January to March and April, and you've gotten the entirety of America's casualties in Vietnam. America's casualties. And we're talking about something that's being largely concentrated within Russia. Of course, there are foreign mercenaries. There are now the North Korean soldiers, which 30,000 North Korean soldiers are about to be sent over to Russia as they reinforce them with more troops. But to me, this incredibly high rate of loss, and with the Ukrainians having less loss, still significant, but less loss, indicates that the Russians, in order to keep the pressure that they've built on the Pokrovsk axis, that they've built on the Kupiansk axis to push into the Sumy area that they have, even though now they're not able to really move forward anymore in the Sumy region. They've been blocked for the time being. In order to make these gains, in order to keep this pressure, in order to create the media environment on where we're talking about Ukraine losing a village of 300 people, like we're talking about losing some of the most, like it's an extremely important military installation, where in order to keep that environment, they've had to keep this extremely high loss of casualties. And this could be from a few sources, not only the high pressure, but also the fact that they're using more motorcycles, they're using more ATVs, they're using more golf carts in order to get troops to the front line, which is both an example of, I think, them trying, different tactics, but also an example of the equipment shortage, the vehicle shortage bearing itself out on the front line, of them finding new ways to get the troops there. And that is a quick way to get a massive troops from one location to another location to try to storm a trench, even if it means they have very little protection and they trade a lack of protection for speed. This is how you swarm a trench. This is how you swarm a trench with 2 to 3 soldiers with 15 to 20 to 25. And even if you lose half the soldier or even a majority of the soldiers on the way there, if you have 8 soldiers in a trench, maybe they come out on top and they take the trench. So I think it's being borne out from a lack of vehicles or a shortage of vehicles that they're trying to compensate for, but it also is an indication of the cost of continuing this pressure, as the Ukrainians have taken a strategy of mass drone production, of 2 drones for every leg of a Russian armed serviceman. And you would think, with that type of casualty numbers being admitted to by the United States State Department, that they would see that as a potential pressure point to bring an end to the war. But so far, they have been unable to build up that pressure on that pressure point, to continue shipments to the Ukrainians in a way that Trump talked about on the campaign trail, to expand shipments to the Ukrainians like he talked about on the campaign trail, or even place the economic pressures in place that would make it harder for the Russians to finance the war. And until Trump pulls the trigger, they cannot take advantage of this weak point in the Russian war machine. Russia is not a mythical creature. The loss of its sons and daughters is as painful for any other country as it would be for them, and as it is for them. So, at the end of the day, if you don't do anything, you can't expect anything. And so, once again, the end result is, the end advice is, Trump, do something. Don't forget to like, everyone. Helps the stream. That is true. When you like the stream, that interaction does help me a little bit in the algo. For anybody watching this on YouTube, on the boob tube,